Did you ever get the sense that for all our newfangled fancy gadgets and electronics and computing power and internet and mass communication and the fact that we might be going to Mars sometime soon, that society isn't really going forward at all? In fact, in some ways, it's actually going backwards. Okay, so I remember the 70s, the 1970s. And it was, well, compared to today, I think, a slower moving society, although we didn't see it that way. And a more innocent society, but again, we didn't see it that way. There was plenty of raucous stuff going on. Believe me, I wasn't involved in it, but I've read about it. And it was kind of a golden age for music, for movies. A lot of different things being tried, a lot of different directions being travelled. And an era, despite the fact that it was still a fairly religious era. I mean, religion was a big part of society, but in spite of that, an era of tremendous freedoms, freedom of expression, freedoms to live as you wanted, as you wished. This had come out of the 60s, which was the hippie era, and had morphed into the 70s, which was just more flamboyant. The fashion was more flamboyant, the hairstyles were more flamboyant, the lifestyles were more flamboyant. And a key part of all this goings on was the music business, and in particular the rock business. And you had all kinds of really flamboyant, over the top characters and bands, and all kinds of music was getting just thrown around and thrown out there, and some of it stuck and some of it didn't stick, and some of it became timeless. One of the biggest bands that actually came out of the 60s but was huge in the 70s and indeed went on since was The Who, a British rock band. They had a string of hits from the 60s right through the 70s. My Generation. There was the rock opera Tommy. They were iconic in their day, and the lead singer of that band was a guy called Roger Daltrey. Now Roger's in the news lately because he's come out during an interview, and he's basically slammed the youth of today and the whole woke direction that they seem to be travelling.
That's an attention getter.
And rushing headlong into this woke agenda, this woke world that they want to create, this woke utopia. And he slams that because, as I said, he's from that era, he's from that generation, and he was living an avant-garde, if you like, I suppose, like every major rock star, an avant-garde flamboyant lifestyle, and he was enjoying all those freedoms, which at the time were kind of taken for granted. I'm sure he and most of us thought, well, it'll just keep getting better. It'll just keep getting freer. We'll just have more freedoms. But he begs to differ. Let's hop on over here to the Mail. Naomi Harris writes, quote, It's terrifying. This is a quote from Roger Daltrey. The miserable world they're going to create. The Who's Roger Daltrey criticised today's woke generation and says he's privileged to have lived in the golden era. Well, let's have a little delve into this, shall we, and see what is going on. Naomi writes, he's part of one of the biggest rock bands of the 20th century, having sold over 100 million records worldwide during their illustrious 50-year career. Yeah, they're still actually going. I think they have a a new record out or coming out. The article goes on, and the Who's Roger Daltrey has taken a swipe at today's woke generation as he declared, "It's terrifying that they are creating a miserable world for themselves." I would agree with that. In a new interview, the lead singer, 77, he's 77, pushing 80, looks good for it, added that he feels privileged to have grown up in a golden era. There he is, that's the interview there with, I know that chap from somewhere. Although he has changed a bit from what I remember him. There's Roger, looking pretty spry. Let's see what he goes on to say. Roger had joined bandmate Pete Townsend, 75, so they're all up there, on Zane Lowe's Apple Music 1, as they celebrated the release of the super deluxe version of their hit third studio album, The Who Sellout. So yeah, there's a new album in the works. That's usually when these things kind of pop out of the closet. And amid talk about their long career and their hopes to tour again, Roger had some harsh criticism when talk soon turned to contemporary politics and today's society. After ranting about anti-vaxxers, he turned his attention to politics and he said, "It's just getting harder to disseminate the truth. It's almost like now we should turn the whole thing off, go back to newsprint, go back to the word of mouth and start to read books again." It's wishful thinking, it's not going to happen, but he has a point. He goes on to say, quote, "I don't know, we might get somewhere because it's becoming so absurd now with AI, all the tricks it can do, and the woke generation."
Anyways, I'm not done. Not done. Shut the fuck up.
Discussing the woke generation further, he went on, "It's terrifying, the miserable world they're going to create for themselves. I mean, anyone who's lived a life and you see what they're doing, you just know that it's a route to nowhere. Especially when you've lived through the periods of a life that we've had the privilege to. I mean, we've had the golden era, there's no doubt about that." Yeah, I think there's something to be said for his train of thought there. Elaborating on what he means to have been privileged during a certain time, he told how his generation had, quote, come out of a war, World War II, they had indeed, had come out of a levelled society, lived through socialist governments. Well, the 70s was no fun with socialism, the Labour Party, 3-day weeks and power cuts and stuff. I remember that. And added that he'd been to countries at the height of communism. Well, the Who would have toured all over the world at the time, so they would have been probably all over the Eastern Bloc, all over the Soviet Union, I'd imagine, at some point. So he would have seen it up close and personal. Meanwhile, the pinball wizard Baker went on to discuss the band's longevity, whilst also praising the songwriting talents of his bandmate Pete. There's Roger there, looking good. What else have we here? He told Zane, 47, "Fortunately, we did have the intelligence, or I had the intelligence certainly, to recognise that within the abilities of Pete Townsend, we had someone really unique in his songwriting ability. He had the ability to voice that inner voice that we all have into music in a way that it struck a chord, which in itself is timeless. That's what's so amazing when I listen back to these records." Well, as I said, it was an amazing time for freedom of expression, and everything wasn't done to a formula that had been worked out by somebody with a PhD or an AI computer algorithm, which seems to be the way everything works today. They take very few chances. Back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, as Frank Zappa said, the music executives, oftentimes they didn't know what the hell they were looking at. They didn't understand it. They didn't know what it was. They couldn't get the vibe. But they more or less said, who the hell knows what it is? Get it out there, see what the kids think of it. And as Frank Zappa said, we were better off with all those old cigar-chomping fogies than we are today with these so-called tuned-in, hip-to-the-groove record executives or music executives who are basically working everything to a computer algorithm of what the computer says will sell, or what the person who has studied it and done a PhD in it says will sell. So that's why music today to me is so stale.
Al Queer. Al Queer.
It's just stale. The creativity is gone because the freedom is gone. Back in the days of The Who, and a lot of bands, both on the other side, America, and in Britain, and indeed in Europe, they were just loose cannons. They were just, there was prog rock, there was music was going in all kinds of crazy directions, and it was able to, which it isn't able to now, I don't think. Maybe in very, very small niche fringes, but so yeah, for all our technology, for all our ability to, you can have your own recording studio in your bedroom with equipment that these guys, The Who and bands like that couldn't dream of in a massive studio. You can have it now just on your computer at home in your front room. So in spite of the technology, we're not going forward. Let's go back here and see what else we've got in this one. The musician also went on to say that performing in the band's early days can be likened to going into battle, explaining in the early days, for me, it was like going to war. It was like going into battle. It really was. For a very long time there, it was us against the audience, and we were going to draw our music through them to the back of the hall. As the halls got bigger, of course, that became more and more extravagant. And the volume went up and up and up and up. I think a lot of rock stars, the speakers were getting so big and the volume was getting so crazy that some of them were deaf, or as good as. It was almost like a battle, and the slightest little thing used to wind me up terribly into a lot of anger and inner anger, which again came out within the performances. While despite promoting the band's deluxe album, this new album, Roger admitted that he has no interest in them, though he believes it is important for fans. He stated, "I have to say that these new editions, it's really good for the fans, but I've got no interest in them whatsoever, to be honest with you." That's interesting. Quote goes on, "To me, when I record a song and put it down, that's like a painting, it's finished, and I walk away from it. And then these things, it's like I in some ways feel a bit like a used car salesman as these things come out. But then again, it is important. They are important." Well, I think I get what he's saying there. They have a place in history. They have a place in music history. They have a time and a place where their finger was on the pulse. And that's a time and that's a space. And once it's gone, it's gone. So you can't just, be the oldest swinger in town. You can't recreate that vibe when you're pushing 80. You can still belt out all your old iconic tunes that you wrote when you were 22 or performed all through your 20s and maybe 30s, but as he says, you're like a used car salesman, really. It's not the same vibe at all, but it's important for fans because a lot of people, these things, they are part of their history, part of their growing up, part of their youth, and if nothing else, they enjoy seeing the real guys actually perform them. So, yeah, he's right. Even though he mightn't be getting, certainly not what he used to get out of it, it is important for fans. So, that's Roger's take on the woke generation. Now, just as an addendum to that on a similar theme, we have another guy here. Let's hop on over to this guy. You'll all know and love the one and the only Johnny Rotten, John Lydon of the Sex Pistols. Now, this was slightly after they would have been, say, one step removed from the generation of the Who. Again, at the time, very out there, very controversial, extremely controversial. But when viewed in the lens of time, all good fun, all innocent fun. They were just kicking doors and knocking down tables and stuff. But it was innocent. It was all innocent. So what does John Lydon have to say, Johnny Rotten? Never mind the wokeness, Sex Pistols John Lydon hits out at spoilt, selfish snowflakes for contributing to cancel culture.
I don't give a fuck! I don't give a fuck!
Well, he's not wrong. Connie Rusk for Mail Online writes, Sex Pistols rocker John Lydon has hit out at spoilt snowflakes and declared wokeness a load of bollocks. There, I've said it. The singer, 65, slightly younger than the other guys. We have 10 years probably in between them. So they would have come on maybe... I mean, the Who would have been still massive when these guys were knocking about, the Sex Pistols, but they would have been a generation on. The singer, 65, also known as Johnny Rotten, slammed cancel culture for tearing down and defacing statues, including Winston Churchill, over racism claims. In an expletive-laden interview, I think most of his interviews are expletive-laden, kind of a stock and trade John Lydon trait there. With the Daily Star, John slammed the woke brigade and said universities created spoilt snowflakes with shit for brains.
I don't give a fuck! I don't give a fuck!
There's John there. Yeah, still looking a bit wacky. Could have ironed his shirt, I suppose. Then I suppose he doesn't really care. John said passionately, these people aren't really genuinely disenfranchised at all. They just view themselves as special. It's selfishness. And in that respect, it's divisive and can only lead to trouble. Where is this moral majority nonsense coming from when they're basically the ones doing all the wrong for being so bitchy, judgmental and vicious against anybody who doesn't go along with the current popular opinion?
Anyways, I'm not done. Not done. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah, he's certainly knocking that out of the park. Very true indeed, Johnny, my lad. The Sex Pistols. I remember one of the boys came into primary school with one of their records one day. I think it was Never Mind the Bollocks. Yeah, that was a bit close to the mark. That caused a bit of a fracas with the teaching staff. But good times. Who can forget their timeless classic, Frigging in the Rigging? Yeah, a lot of memorable songs there from the boys. Bit out there at the time, bit contentious at the time, and certainly again had their time, had their place, and had their space. But like I said at the start, are we, with all this wokeness, with all this cancel culture, with all this people getting fired and censored and wrecked for some idiotic thing they tweeted 10 years ago, probably on the way home from the pub after a few pints. It's not... We never had to worry about that stuff. We never had to worry about that. That was never a thing that we had to concern ourselves about. We were allowed to be young and stupid and dumb and say rubbishy, stupidy things and make stupid jokes and, do many things that we later regretted or later came to see how stupid they were. But the world that these millennials are creating, this woke, ultra PC, politically correct, cancel culture world, that's backwards. That's backwards you're going there. That's not forward. You're not helping, you're not making things better, you're making things worse. We had things better. Nobody can drag up a tweet I tweeted in 1984. It's how lucky am I? It's great. I'm sure I said loads of stupid stuff. Everybody does. It's part of growing up. So that's not a one generation thing. That's an every generation thing. So these old rockers, these old guys still belting out the tunes, they realise that, yeah, when all is said and done, they did live through a golden age. And they realise it. They see the way things are going. And fair play to them for at least calling it out. Somebody has to. And the more people that do, the more hope there is that at one point it will right itself. So there you go. Woke culture is trash.